In the spring of 1851, everyone in Loudoun County swore they knew who Mrs. Caroline Mercer was, until they realized they didn't. If you want more stories like this, dark, human, and historically grounded, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your support keeps these narratives coming. They knew the big house she lived in, a wide, white mansion with too many columns perched above the river like it had something to prove. They knew the year of black crepe she wore after her first baby was born dead, and how the second child never came at all. They knew her husband, Thomas Mercer, as a man who kept his ledgers tight and his overseer tighter, his name written neatly in the bank's books, and in rougher hands on the slave lists. They knew Caroline as the woman who played the piano too well, laughed too loudly for polite company, and stared at the horizon too long when she thought no one was watching. What they didn't know, at least not at first, was the name of the man who slept on straw in the stable loft, and sometimes climbed the back stair when the house went quiet. His name was Eli. Thomas had bought him at 20 for his shoulders. The overseer liked to joke broad as a wagon strong enough to lift a barrel alone. Eli's skin was dark and smooth. His hands were rough from years of field work. But there was a carefulness in how he moved that didn't match the overseer's laughter. He spoke little, watched everything, and kept his anger folded small like a blade hidden in cloth. When he first arrived at Mercer Place, older hands warned him low and fast. "Don't look too long at the mistress," one man said with a half-smile that wasn't really a smile. "She'll burn you if you do." Eli didn't answer. He already knew some women in fine dresses were dangerous without meaning to be, and some were dangerous on purpose. The first time Caroline truly looked at him, she was standing on the back veranda in a blue dress that didn't feel like hers. A gift from her sister in Savannah, who wrote long letters about balls and theater and promenades by the river, things Caroline did not have. Caroline had no dances, no orchestra, no thrill of new faces, just supper parties with the same people saying the same things, and church hymns that sounded like the world was always meant to be quiet. She wore the dress anyway and watched Eli carry a crate of seed from wagon to shed. His muscles worked under his shirt steady and effortless, and something in her throat went dry. When he glanced up just once, their eyes met. For a heartbeat, she saw surprise there, then something like recognition. Then he dropped his gaze to the ground where it was supposed to belong, but the look stayed with her, clinging like heat on skin. "He's a strong one," Thomas said over supper, speaking more to his own satisfaction than to his wife. "Got a good price on him. Eli, they call him. That's what his papers say. He'll earn his keep." Caroline made a polite sound. On her plate, the food sat untouched. Thomas's voice droned on about cotton prices and railroads and the kind of future men imagined when they thought money could build safety. Caroline thought about Eli's hands on the crate, the easy way he carried weight. She thought about the brief moment when his eyes had met hers and then fled. That night she lay in the big bed with carved posts and smooth sheets, listening to the house breathe the creak of old wood, the stove cooling the faint murmur from the quarters beyond the garden. Thomas, drunk on his importance and a few glasses of whiskey, fell asleep quickly, snoring into the pillow, like a man who believed the world would always hold him. Caroline stared at the ceiling and thought about the life she had ended up living. A careful performance on a stage that never changed, with an audience that never clapped louder than polite approval. She thought about the child she'd buried and the children she couldn't carry. The way women at church looked at her with pity and superiority braided together. "Some wombs are more blessed than others," one had whispered once, not quite softly enough. Caroline didn't want pity. She didn't want brittle respect stamped onto her as a man's possession. She wanted to feel like something in the world was hers. It began, like most disasters do, with something that looked harmless. A rainy afternoon, a broken chair on the porch, mud tracked into the hall, the housekeeper fussing like the world would end if dirt touched the wrong floorboard. "Miss Caroline won't like seeing that mess," she muttered, wiping at the mud. "I'll fix it," Eli said quietly. The housekeeper snorted. You fix fence posts, boy, not furniture. Eli knelt anyway, ran his fingers along the split, and studied the grain. Wood's the same, he said, just cut different. He pulled a small knife from his pocket, nothing fancy but sharp, and began to work with a patience that didn't belong to a man who was supposed to live as orders and punishment. Caroline came down the stairs and stopped. A big man crouched on polished floorboards, all his attention on the broken thing in his hands. Rain dripped from his hat brim onto his shoulders. His damp shirt clung to him. She watched him shave the wood, fit the pieces together, like he could convince the chair to become whole again. "You're wasting your time," she said lightly, more to hear his voice than from any concern over the chair. He looked up blank for a beat, then politely composed. "It's your chair, ma'am. I figured you'd rather sit in it than look at it broke." Caroline smiled despite herself. "You speak bold for someone with a chain on his ankle." His gaze dropped briefly to the iron, then returned to her. "Chain don't change what a thing can be fixed," he said. "Just changes who holds the hammer." Caroline laughed. Really laughed. The sound startling both of them. "Finish it," she said, testing him. "We'll see if you're as good as you think." He did. Later, when she sat on the chair, it held her weight without complaint. That night she played the piano, while lamplight threw her reflection back from the dark window glass. A woman in a blue dress in a house with too many rules and too little air. A woman whose husband cared for crops and credit more than her quiet grief. A woman who had just discovered that somewhere on her land lived a man who could fix broken things without asking permission to try. After that, she found reasons to call for him. A window stuck in its frame. Send Eli, she told the housekeeper, as if it were purely practical. He seems to have a talent for stubborn wood. The housekeeper's eyes flickered just once, but she nodded. She had been in big houses long enough to recognize the first tremor of an earthquake. Eli came hat in hand, shoulders slightly hunched, as though the walls themselves demanded he shrink. Caroline led him to the upstairs hall window overlooking the river. "It won't open," she said. "The air in here is unbearable." He ran his fingers along the swollen wood, set his shoulder against the sash, and shoved. With a sharp jerk, it slid upward. Cool air rushed in, smelling of water and wet earth. "Thank you," Caroline said, stepping close to feel the breeze. They stood beside each other, not touching, but close enough that space felt loud. She saw the line of his jaw, a scar at his temple, the shadow of lashes on his cheeks. Too close. She stepped back. "You play good," Eli said suddenly. Caroline blinked. "What piano?" he said. "At night. I hear it when I'm putting the horses up." He looked down as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to have an opinion. "Sounds like somebody talking," he added, "who ain't got nobody listening." Caroline's breath caught. No one had ever spoken of her playing like that. To Thomas, it was a social ornament. To other ladies, it was a skill to be judged. To Eli, it was a voice. "Maybe that's what it is," she said softly. "A conversation with no one." He glanced up and held her gaze. For the second time, their eyes met without him dropping his. There was danger in it, and something else, the simple, terrifying truth of being seen. After that, she found more small reasons, a door that wouldn't latch, a step that creaked a loose board on the veranda. Each time Eli did what he was asked, quickly said little, and left. But the spaces between their words began to fill with something that made Caroline's skin feel too tight. It was Caroline's friend Lydia who finally named what was forming. Lydia Albright visited twice a year from town, arriving with trunks full of northern-cut dresses and a hunger for gossip that never seemed to be satisfied. She was 2 years younger than Caroline and acted 10 years younger still, when they were alone, sprawling across beds, kicking off her shoes, speaking of men as if they were poorly trained dogs. "Marriage," Lydia declared one sweltering afternoon as they lay on the parlor rug near an open door, chasing a scrap of breeze as a bargain where men get everything they want and women get tolerated. "You are not helping my spirits," Caroline said, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. "Oh, don't pout," Lydia said. "You're luckier than most. At least your husband isn't old and ugly, just boring." Then she rolled onto her side, eyes bright with mischief. "And from what I hear, some women have found ways to diversify their arrangements." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Lydia, what are you saying?" Lydia's smile sharpened. "You think you're the only one who's ever looked at a strong back in the quarters and thought God was very detailed that day? Men think they own all the secrets. They forget who does the washing." Caroline tried to look scandalized. "You're awful." "I'm honest," Lydia said. "And I know you, Caroline Mercer. You get this face very still when you're trying not to want something. You've been wearing it all week." Her gaze flicked toward the back window. "Is it the one who fixed your steps?" "The tall one, Eli." The name in Lydia's mouth made Caroline's heart jump. "You've been watching," Caroline said, trying to sound amused and failing. "I am always watching," Lydia replied lightly. "It's the only entertainment women like us get." Then Lydia sobered just a touch. "I'm not judging you. Lord knows I'm in no position to. I'm just saying you could do worse than a man who looks at you like you're real." Caroline turned away, heat rising under her skin. "It isn't like that." "Not yet," Lydia said softly. "But you're already saying his name, not the boy or the hand. That's how it starts." She stretched languidly and, half joking, half not, added, "If you ever decide you're tired of being lonely in this house, you might consider sharing the misery or the pleasure." Her eyes gleamed with the kind of boldness that was easy to perform when you believed consequences belonged to someone else. "If he's as capable as he looks," Lydia murmured, "you could even share him with a friend." Lydia Caroline breathed, half horrified, half pulled toward a ledge she had not known existed. "Oh, relax," Lydia said quickly. "Mostly a joke." But she didn't laugh. Instead, she traced patterns on the rug with one finger. "Just be careful," she said, voice low. "Men like your husband would rather kill a thing than admit they weren't enough for it." That night, Caroline played the piano long after the house went to bed. The music poured out jagged and restless. When she finally stopped, the silence felt like a held breath. Then there was a soft knock at the parlor door. Caroline froze. "It's Eli," a voice said quietly. She hesitated, then spoke, surprised by the steadiness of her own sound. "Come in." He stepped inside, hat in his hands, shoulders slightly hunched as though the room itself was a trap. When the parlor door clicked closed, the sound was small, but in Eli's ears it roared. For a moment, the three of them simply stood there. A woman who had been trained to perform, a woman who pretended she was fearless, and a man who knew exactly who would burn if the fire spread. "Come here," Caroline said. Her voice held, but her hands did not. Lydia had gone quiet, eyes sharp and bright, not like a spectator at a show, but like someone standing at the edge of a cliff deciding whether to jump. Eli walked closer. The chain at his ankle whispered against the floor. He moved as if through deep water, careful because he knew something they did not. When white people played with fire, it was always the black body that burned first. He had seen it. A mistress's boredom or hunger reaching into the quarters, and if anything ever came to light, it was the enslaved man who paid in blood while the lady's reputation was wrapped in fainting and confusion. Caroline lifted a hand toward his wrist and stopped as if a thought had finally caught her. "You can say no," she said, suddenly surprising herself. "I won't have you dragged here like you're a tool from the shed." "Do you understand?" Eli met her eyes. That same dangerous recognition. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "I can't say no. Not really." His gaze flicked to the door, the ceiling, the whole world pressed down on his shoulders. "But I can tell you what'll happen if you forget what I am and what he is," he said. He didn't say Thomas's name as though speaking it could summon the master from the air. "You'll be sad. Your friend will be sad. He'll be mad. I'll be dead. That's the sum of it." The truth landed between them heavy and cold. For an instant, shame almost made Caroline send him away. Then anger rose hot and sharp, not at Eli, not even at herself, but at the tight little box the world had shoved her into with wife printed neatly on the lid. "You think I don't know the cost?" she snapped, then softened her voice as if she hated the cruelty of her own sharpness. "I've lived my whole life paying other people's prices." She swallowed, forced herself to look at him like a person instead of a secret. "I'm not asking you to forget the danger," she said. "I'm asking you if there is any part of you that wants to be here anyway." Lydia turned her face slightly away, offering the smallest illusion of privacy. Eli swallowed. When his answer came, it was simple. "Yes," he said. "There is." What followed belonged more to closeness than spectacle, more to being seen than to any theatrical romance. No grand declarations, no fantasy of rescue. Just three people trapped in different ways reaching for something alive, something that did not belong to the men who owned land names and law. Later, when the room went quiet again and the house seemed to exhale, Lydia sat on the edge of the sofa, hair loosened, breath unsteady. She laughed once, shaken. "Well," she said, looking at Caroline, "you have been very selfish, keeping that to yourself." Caroline flushed, but she laughed too, fear and relief tangled together like vines. "You're terrible," Caroline muttered. "You're welcome," Lydia replied. And the two women shared a look that needed no explanation in a world where everything about them was possessed and recorded under men's names. Houses, fields, even their bodies. This messy, frightening thing felt like it belonged to neither husbands nor fathers. Eli buttoned his shirt with careful fingers, stepping back into the shape the world required of him. As he moved toward the door, Caroline touched his arm lightly. "No one can know," she whispered. "I know," Eli said. "Been knowing that since the first time you sent for me about that window." His gaze stayed steady. But secrets don't stay buried easy in a house like this. Too many eyes. Too many ears. You remember that when you start feeling bold. Downstairs in the kitchen, the housekeeper kneaded bread dough with vicious, efficient motions. Her hands had long ago learned to work while her mind ran ahead. She had seen enough in 1/2 second at the parlor door, Caroline's hand on Eli's arm, Lydia's laughter with a sharp, hungry edge. She knew what could grow in such heat. And she knew exactly where disaster would land. Not on women like Caroline and Lydia who could cry faint and be sent away to relatives for nerves. Not on men like Thomas, who could walk into the bank and courthouse and still be called Mr. after anything short of murder. Disaster came for the man with iron on his ankle and for the people in the kitchen who could be blamed for failing to keep order. That night, after the house slept, the housekeeper sat at a scarred table with a candle, a sheet of paper, and a pen that felt wrong in her fingers. Writing was not her job. But she had watched enough letters formed in other hands to scratch out her own. She wrote Mr. Thomas Mercer. Her words were careful. No direct accusation. No mention of Lydia by name. Just what she had seen more than once. Your wife has took an improper interest in the slave man Eli sending for him alone, closing doors. Sir, I fear for your good name and your home. She signed only a loyal servant who wishes to protect you. Names could be a kind of noose. In the morning, she slipped the letter to the teenage boy who drove eggs and butter into town. "Drop this at the post," she told him. "Don't open it. It's grown folks' business." He nodded, eyes wide, and the envelope disappeared into his pocket like a heavy stone. In the quarters, word spread the way such things always did, through fragments, sharp glances, and the quick intelligence of women forced to read white faces like weather. Old Rachel, who'd been on that land since before Caroline married in, shook her head as she shelled beans under a pecan tree. "I seen it coming the day they brought Eli here," she said. "Mistress been restless since that baby died. Restless women and strong men in chains is a bad mix." A young woman named Mira, who shared the loft space near Eli, bit her lip. "You think he wanted it?" It was a dangerous question, but a real one. Rachel sighed. "It don't matter what he wanted," she said. "Not when it come to her. He say no, she cry. He say yes, he die when master find out. That's the corner they pushed him into. Then she dropped bean shells into the pail with more force than necessary. White folks make the trap, she muttered, then blame us for how we jump. Eli said little. He moved through his days as he always had, strong, careful, but something had tightened in him. A new habit of listening for footsteps on gravel when he was near the house. At night, staring at the rafters, he thought about escape in a way he had not allowed himself in years. Not the clean freedom of stories, but the messy kind, where a man ran not toward hope, but away from being crushed between someone else's desire and someone else's rage. By daylight, Caroline and Lydia behaved as if nothing had changed. Tea was poured, needlework held. They discussed dresses recipes which families had risen and fallen, smooth phrases hiding a current underneath. Shared glances when Eli passed. Small smiles at private jokes that had nothing to do with ball gowns. One evening, with Caroline's bedroom door closed, Lydia whispered, "We are playing with thunder." "It feels like the only time I'm awake," Caroline answered, staring at herself in the mirror. "The rest of the time, I'm just arranging flowers on my own grave," poetic Lydia said, and then hesitated. "Do you ever think about what happens if Thomas finds out?" Caroline forced a laugh. "He'd rage. Maybe send Eli away. Maybe send me to my sisters. Eventually, it becomes a story they tell at dinners. Poor Mrs. Mercer. Lost a baby, lost her head, and then everyone goes on." Lydia didn't smile. "That's the prettiest version," she said. "There are uglier ones. You know that." In Savannah, Thomas Mercer read the letter alone in a boarding room. At first he assumed extortion, some crude attempt to pry money loose. Then he recognized the rhythm of his own household in the phrasing, the way the kitchen staff called him sir, the way they spoke of the house as if it were a person. His face went very still as he read. It wasn't merely the idea of his wife's infidelity that twisted his stomach. Men in his position knew in some private corner that idle women and captive men sometimes touched what was forbidden. What cut him was the thought of being a fool in his own house, of other men and women seeing him as a man who could not keep his affairs in order. He read the letter again and again. Improper interest. Sending for him alone. Closing doors. Each phrase pulled tighter, weaving a noose not around Caroline's neck, not yet, but around Thomas's pride. Thomas was not a man who moved in rage. He was a ledger man, a planner. Anger to him was a knife sharpened slowly. He wrote to the postmaster, arranged his return 2 days earlier than expected, and told no one. He wanted truth with his own eyes before he decided how many lives to rearrange. The day his carriage rolled quietly into the drive, the sky over Mercer Place was clear and bright. The house looked exactly as it always did, white and still smoke curling from the kitchen chimney. Somewhere a piano played a few gentle notes, then stopped. In the kitchen, the housekeeper wiped her hands on her apron and stared toward the window, her heart climbing into her throat. She had not expected him so soon. In the quarters, Rachel paused with a basket in her hands and closed her eyes. "Storms here," she murmured. In the stable, Eli heard carriage wheels and felt a chill as if someone had walked across his grave. In the parlor, Caroline and Lydia sat with embroidery in their laps, talking lightly about nothing. When the front door opened and Thomas's voice floated in, they both looked up, matching flashes of surprise in their eyes. Caroline's surprise shifted into something else. Guilt, yes, but also the sharp awareness that the thin line they had been walking had just dropped away. Now the house wasn't a container for their secret. It was a stage. Thomas Mercer did not slam doors. He closed them softly like a man tucking anger away for later. When he stepped into the front hall, dust still on his boots, the housekeeper came running. "Mr. Mercer," she gasped. "We wasn't expecting." "I know," he said flatly. "Where is my wife?" "In the parlor, sir, with Miss Lydia." He nodded once, handed her his hat, and walked down the hall without hurry. Men who rush into battle look like they've lost already. Caroline stood halfway up from the sofa when he appeared. Lydia's embroidery slipped into her lap. The scene looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, two ladies at needlework sunlight on the rug piano, quiet in the corner. "You're back early," Caroline said. Her voice only wavered on the last word. "I am," Thomas replied. His eyes moved over the room, over the windows, the furniture, and the scuffed floorboards near the door where heavy boots often stood. Business finished sooner than expected. Lydia recovered first. "Mr. Mercer, what a surprise. The house is dull without guests," Thomas said with a small bow that felt more like a dismissal than a greeting. "I'll need a moment alone with my wife." Lydia's smile froze, thinned, then returned in a practiced shape. "Of course." As she slipped past him, she gave Caroline one sharp look that said, "Whatever this is, you're about to walk through it alone." When Lydia's footsteps faded, Thomas reached into his coat and placed a folded letter on the table between them. "Do you recognize this hand?" he asked. Caroline's mouth went dry. She picked up the paper and forced her fingers not to tremble. The writing was crude but familiar. Slow, careful letters learned by watching other people write. "Your wife has took an improper interest in the slave man Eli." The words stabbed up at her. "Who wrote this?" Thomas asked. Lying about the author would be pointless. The kitchen spoke in its own rhythms, even on paper. "The housekeeper," Caroline said quietly. "I imagine." "You imagine correctly," Thomas said. "I had time to think on the road whether it was spite or truth. I decided to come home and see for myself." His gaze sharpened. "Tell me, Caroline, is it truth?" There were a dozen answers she could have given. She could have wept, denied, fainted. She could have said Eli forced himself on her, pushed the danger downhill as so many women had done before. She thought of Eli's face when he had said, "I can't say no." Not really. She thought of the chain on his ankle. She thought of Rachel's tired eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "It's true." The word hung in the air like a plate dropped but not yet shattered. Thomas's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. "How long months?" Caroline said. There was no point carving the timeline thinner. His fingers pressed into the back of a chair until his knuckles went white. "And you saw fit," he said, each word measured, "to use my property as your plaything, to make a fool of me in my own house, to pull your friend into it as well." Caroline's head jerked up. She mentioned Lydia. The letter did not, Thomas cut in. "But I know my wife's face, and I know what co-conspiracy looks like when it's sitting on my sofa." The word tasted like metal. "You have shamed me," he said. "You have shamed this name." "I know," Caroline replied. Then Thomas asked suddenly, "Do you love him?" The question startled her love, as if there were room for that clear word in what they had done. Caroline hesitated. Was it love, or hunger, or rebellion, or the desperate need to be seen? "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't think it matters." "You're wrong," Thomas said. "It matters to me." He straightened his coat. "Because love might mean you were only a fool. This," he flicked a finger at the letter, "means you were something else. Something far more dangerous." In the stable, the bell from the front hall rang one sharp chime that meant, "Come at once." Eli's stomach dropped. Master home. Master home early. He wiped his hands on his trousers, breathed deep enough to hurt, and walked toward the house. In the hallway, the housekeeper looked at him, once her face tight. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Eli felt the storm in her silence. Thomas waited in the parlor. Caroline stood rigid by the window. When Eli stepped in, he did not look at Caroline. He couldn't afford to. "Sir," he said. Thomas studied him the way a man studies a horse at auction, assessing muscle stance, the set of his eyes. "How long have you been in my service, Eli?" 3 years, sir." And in those 3 years, Thomas continued, "Did I starve you, whip you without cause, deny you decent clothes in winter?" "No, sir," Eli said. It was mostly true. Thomas was not kind, but he was calculating, careful not to damage what he considered an investment. "So tell me," Thomas said, voice tightening, "what made you think you could repay that by climbing into my house into my wife's favor, like some stallion brought in for breeding?" Eli swallowed. "I didn't climb, sir," he said quietly. "I was called." Caroline flinched. Anger flashed in Thomas's eyes. "You dare put this on her?" Eli shook his head. "No, sir. I know where I stand. I know I'm the one who's going to pay. I'm just not going to lie to make nobody feel better about it." For a fraction of a moment, something like respect flickered in Thomas's gaze, not for what Eli had done, but for the nerve it took to speak that plainly with a noose already visible on the horizon. Then it vanished. "You will not be whipped on my land," Thomas said. "Not for this. I won't give my neighbors that show." He turned to Caroline. "I will not put you out on the road either. That would stain my name more than your behavior has already done. We will say you are unwell. You will go to your sisters for a time. When you return, we will remember how to be polite to each other again." Caroline stared at him, chilled by the coldness of compromise. "And Eli?" she asked, voice tight. Thomas's eyes hardened. "Eli will be sold," he said, "far from here. Somewhere that doesn't know my name. Somewhere no whispered story about this house can follow him back to me." He looked at Eli. "You will be in the wagon at dawn. The trader meets us at the crossroads. You speak of this to no one tonight. You run, I hunt you myself. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Eli said. His voice did not crack. "I understand." Thomas dismissed him with a small motion. Eli turned and left. He did not risk one last glance at Caroline. He knew if he looked at her now, whatever lived in his eyes might kill them both. That night, the house was very quiet. Lydia locked her bedroom door and packed with shaking hands, mind racing ahead. If Thomas wrote to her husband and he would sooner or later, she would be painted as a bad influence, a danger, a woman who didn't know her place. She might be sent away. She might be caged tighter. Either way, her small rebellion would snap back like a whip. In the loft, Eli lay awake, staring at a slice of moonlight between boards. Rachel sat beside him, her old hands folding and unfolding. "I heard," she said, softly. Everybody heard, Eli replied. The house had been a drum that afternoon, carrying every sharp word through its bones. "You could run." Rachel offered not with hope, but with an old reflex. "Night like this, they'd have trouble tracking you." Eli shook his head. "Run where?" "To what?" He swallowed and spoke the truth like a confession. "He ain't wrong, Rachel. His name's heavy. This place would eat me alive if I stayed." He gestured into the darkness. "This way. Maybe I get a chance to see something else before I go under." Rachel nodded slowly. "South ain't kind," she warned. "They work men to death down there." Eli gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "World ain't been kind nowhere I stood yet," he said. "Kindness don't seem to be part of the terms." Just before dawn, as the eastern sky lightened, Caroline crept down the back stairs. Her nightgown was covered by a dark shawl, her hair loose. In the yard, the trader's wagon creaked as men loaded what little Eli was allowed to bring: a bundle of clothes, a tin cup, a blanket someone had slipped him out of pity. Eli stood with his wrists loosely tied, waiting. When he saw her, his shoulders went stiff. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "I had to see you," she whispered. "Once more." He nodded. "Before you go back to being Mrs. Mercer." There was no spite, only fact. Tears pricked Caroline's eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. The words felt small, thin, useless. "I know," Eli replied. He looked past her toward the white columns, the house that looked so clean from a distance and so cruel up close. "You were lonely in a cage," he said. "I was lonely in a field. We reached through the bars and grabbed what we could. The man who built the cage gets to decide the price." He glanced down at his bound hands. "That's the math of it." Caroline wanted to say, You were never just a secret. But she tasted how selfish comfort could be when it was offered by the person who helped cause the pain. So instead, she whispered, "I wish it had been different." Eli gave that same half-smile, the one that carried too much truth to be gentle. "Different for us means the whole world different," he said. "I don't see that coming any time soon." The trader barked that it was time. Eli climbed into the wagon. As it began to roll, Caroline stepped forward, heart hammering. "Eli," she called. He looked back. She reached into her pocket and held up a folded paper. Another letter, not the one the housekeeper wrote. Thomas had burned that in the fireplace. This one Caroline had written in the night, her handwriting slanted and blotched by tears. "It's your name," she said, voice shaking, "and the truth, in case someone somewhere ever asks." Eli frowned, then nodded. The wagon slowed just enough for Caroline to run alongside and press the paper into his bound hands. The trader cursed, but he didn't stop her. To him, it was nothing, just a scrap. To Eli, it was strange and fragile, a piece of him recorded in ink by the same woman who had helped break him, the only one in that world with paper and the power to put his story where it might survive. Miles later, after river travel and long road, that letter would be read in a cramped boarding room in New Orleans by a free black man who could sound out the words. He would trace the name. Eli read what happened at Mercer Place and murmur, "You ain't the only one got used that way. But most of us don't have proof." He would tuck the letter into a bundle of other stories, seeds of anger and understanding that would take years to grow. Back in Loudoun County, Thomas Mercer told his neighbors only that he had sold a troublesome hand and that his wife was resting with family. Lydia left 2 days later, her trunk heavier and her laughter brittle. The housekeeper kept her job. No one mentioned the letter she had written. People like her survived by knowing when to be invisible again. In the quarters, Rachel told the story to anyone who would listen. She left out the parts that could get someone whipped and kept the ones that mattered. A mistress who thought she could share a man like a dress between friends. A letter that crawled into town and bit the master. Wagon wheels turning at dawn. And under the pecan tree she would say, voice low and steady, "It don't matter how high the house is. Truth can slide under the door on a piece of paper. And if you're still here at the end, type truth in the comments. I read them. I see you." And it tells the algorithm this kind of storytelling is worth sharing.